Welcome to Without Regret, the podcast. This podcast is for people who are looking for inspiration to overcome obstacles in life and want to see that it is possible to live your best life and become successful, whatever that means to you, regardless of your circumstances. Hear from me and my guests as we share our stories of perseverance. My name is Tamara, and I'm the host of Without Regret, the podcast. In this powerful and inspiring episode, we delve into the extraordinary life of Victoria Pelletier, a woman who defied all odds to become an award-winning executive leader and #1 best-selling author. Victoria's early years were marked by unimaginable challenges, born to a drug-addicted teenage mother who subjected her to exceptionally abusive conditions. You will hear about Victoria's incredible journey of triumph over adversity and trauma at such a young age after being adopted at the age of 4. Her ability to build resilience in the face of such hardships has been the driving force behind her unstoppable and dynamic nature. As a corporate executive, board director, and entrepreneur, Victoria's accomplishments speak volumes about her indomitable spirit. Prepare to be moved as we delve into Victoria's journey from a tumultuous childhood to becoming a mentor and leader in the corporate world. Her story serves as a testament to the power of resilience and determination, reminding us all that we were born to lead, not to be led by our circumstances. Join us for this captivating episode where we explore the life of an extraordinary individual who turned her trauma into triumph and is now leaving an indelible mark on the world through her unstoppable spirit and dynamic leadership. Please welcome Victoria Pelletier. Well, thank you so much for coming on here. I don't know how different of a conversation this is going to be. I've actually listened to a couple of other podcasts that you've been on, perused your website, kind of got to know you a little bit through that. Here we're not so much talking about business. We're more talking about just overcoming tough situations that we were born into or decisions that we made ourselves and how we got to be where we are now. And your story is especially inspiring to me, being a woman who, had some serious success at a very young age. That's very inspiring. So let's start though with talking about your childhood and kind of the circumstances you were born into.
Sure. Yeah. I do tell my origin story quite a bit, in large part because it's hard for me to talk about where my drive came from a career and life perspective without telling that story. And so for me, I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother, Julie, who was exceptionally abusive to me. And so I went in and out of care a few times, removed from her. And then also she met the people that would eventually become my adoptive parents and would give me to them after an episode. So I can vividly remember the last day I remained in her care was a call to the people that adopted me and said, come and get her before I kill her. So, that really scarred me physically and emotionally. And it took me many years to learn how to be much more resilient. I was tough and, had this tough exterior, but I'd say I built walls around me versus learning to process all of those things. And it was actually my adoptive mom who was very good at, getting me to talk and be incredibly self-reflective around the emotions I was feeling that drove further thinking or actions or behavior. And that remains one of my biggest whys. In that I was determined I would be better than my biology, but also better than circumstance. So adopted to, a loving household and my mother in particular, extremely loving and did amazing things for me, but it was lower socioeconomic, household. So my dad was a janitor, my mama, a secretary, and there was I didn't never had food insecurity, and I didn't need to worry about clothes. But, there was nothing else. There were no vacations. I didn't get to go on, the school trips and all those sorts of things. My mom said to me, I think when I was 11 years old, she's like, Tori, you need to do better than us. And without necessarily being able to articulate the way I am today, I knew that I was going to do better and do more than, again, biology or circumstance. And that's where this kind of unstoppable nature has come from, quite frankly.
And just to be clear, Unstoppable is the name of your book.
Yeah, it's a co-authored book, and actually it was the name that the publishers had already, and that is my motto. So of course I was all in once they'd invited me to participate in that. So yes, I signed the majority of my social media posts with that. It's like the main keynote that I deliver a majority of the time. It's the title. Love that philosophy and way of living.
So how old were you when you were adopted?
4.
Okay.
And a lot of people will ask, like, how, like, I think a majority of people don't remember things before the age of 5 or 6, but because it was so traumatic for me, I definitely have memory of a lot of.
I have a lot of memories prior to 4 years old, so that doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah. So it, like I said, it informed a lot, even though those early years, and I'd say even the relationships I subsequently put myself in. You know, I was raped at 14, and although there's zero victim shaming at all, I recognize I put myself in some precarious situations, and you know that was one of those situations. And so the fear and insecurity I had of being rejected, of not being loved, of being hurt, followed me. And it took many years to get much more comfortable in my skin and love who I was and recognize that I could be loved.
Right. So when did you realize that you were in control? When did the no excuses philosophy come into play for you?
Again, I don't think I had the words around it until much later, but the reality is I was operating in that way from a very early age. I started working at age 11 in a hair salon. And that was because if there was anything extra I wanted, I had to buy it for myself. And through there, I recognized how I felt like I was in control, that I could control how I showed up and I performed at work, the skills I gained. But with that came challenge. I mean, my first leadership role was that at 14, I became the assistant manager of the shoe store that I worked at. And the challenges that came with, in this case, I even was leading people who were 20 years older than, or 30 years older than me. And so that early adversity, and by the way, I also hit I'm not exceptionally tall. I'm 5'8", although shrinking daily, I think. But I hit this height by the time I was around 11 years old. So I was taller than my teacher.
Oh, wow.
I was gifted, and it wasn't at a time where I was ostracized for it. Now I find it very different, in this day and age. So I just had all of this challenge even from people around me. And so it's just, when all of these things came up, both personally and then even through my early work situation, I was just like, well, that's not going to stop me. I'm going to show them I'm going to do better. And so again, I didn't have the words to say no excuses, but I just always operated that way. And then it sort of, I started using the language more formally, probably in my 30s.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. The without regret comes from my motto of no regret, really, no regrets, but that was taken. So I had to, to modify. So same kind of philosophy, same kind of thing for me. It's like, but it came much later in my life that I realized that I was in control, truly in control. I mean, I think around 1920, when I had my daughter, is when I decided that I didn't want to continue living that life, or I wanted to be able to provide better for my daughter, but I still didn't know how. And I still didn't understand that I had the control to do it. I had the desire, but not the understanding yet to get there. It came much later. So love having someone like you on, though, that did realize it at such a, a much younger age. So I was curious about your adoptive parents and whether you already answered kind of partly the question of how they influenced you. Were they obviously were not very well-to-do people. So I'm assuming you did go to college. I don't think you necessarily get where you are without a degree. If you did, fantastic. Good for you.
I did go to college for sure. Although actually I think there's lots of people who can get there without as well. Although I consciously made a decision at one point not to get my MBA. And that's just because I had became an executive leader and realized it wasn't actually going to garner me the network or more money. So I consciously made that decision. And so, yeah, my mom was much more like the formidable force for me. My my dad, I don't think, is a very good human. He certainly wasn't to my mother, but it was really my mom who was very much there and helping me, be a better human. Although also a roller coaster. My mom was diagnosed as being manic depressive. I graduated high school at 16 and went to college, and she had convinced me to stay home because I wanted to go out of state. Or I'm originally actually from Canada, so I wasn't in Canada.
I kind of figured.
Go to a different province versus state. And she's like, no, Tori, if you stay here, then at least you don't have to pay room and board. But like within a matter of months, I started to see it was tough for my dad and I with her ups and downs. And so I moved out pretty quickly, and then she got her diagnosis and was medicated. So I'm sure it would have been much, much better. My mom was just this amazing human being. She passed away 20 years ago. Or so.
Wow.
So she was great. But yeah, I mean, I wish she could have seen the woman that I've like turned into, for sure, because I know she'd be proud.
Right. And you give her a whole lot of credit for it too. And I'm sure that would make her happy.
Yes.
I don't know what your beliefs are, but maybe she's looking down from above and,
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I know I'm not actually a religious or spiritual person, but I believe in energy. So perhaps, yes.
That's fantastic. So, you graduated at 16 and actually went out on your own to college at 16.
Yeah. So I
was dropping out of high school at 16.
I was in the gifted program, and I ended up skipping some schools, which is why I graduated earlier. And then went off to college. I turned 17 like over the summer and went off. And then like I said, it was a challenge with my mom on the home front until her mental health issues were diagnosed. And so I moved in with what I thought was going to be temporarily with my boyfriend. And then we ended up together for a number of years. And I bought my first house with him actually when I was 19 years old. And then, just kind of progressed from there, although we broke up, and interestingly, I bought another house on my own, and I left it to my parents when I got relocated cross country. Sadly, they lost it 2 years later in a bankruptcy. So it is
going to do.
Yeah.
So you graduated pretty early then.
Yes.
Okay. So then you have this degree. What was your degree in? Curiosities business or?
No. So my plans were to be a lawyer. And so, like many colleges and universities, the one I went to, you had to do an undergraduate degree before you could go to law school. It wasn't one you could enter directly into. So I took psychology because I thought it would help me understand the criminals I might be defending. Although I didn't know if I was going corporate or criminal law, and I enjoyed it. And I took Latin because I thought it would help me again with the legal terms and whatnot. Although I will tell you, I actually dropped out of Latin. There was too much homework for me to keep up with. So I'm like, forget that. But yeah, so social sciences was my undergrad, nothing to do with business at all. All of my business education has come literally on the job from the corporate world since.
Right. But psychology is ingrained in so much of it. So I eventually went back and got a degree in marketing. And I say that I basically have a degree in psychology because marketing is so much about psychology, but on the other side, not helping people necessarily with problems, but helping them, figure out that they have this problem and this is going to solve their problem. But I also really enjoyed psychology, and I often consider going back and getting another degree in psychology, but we'll see if that happens.
I couldn't imagine ever going back to school. The thought of it,
it's tough. It's very tough. And it took me 15 years to get my bachelor's. So yeah, it's tough to think about going back at 50. So yeah. So yeah, you answered the question I had written down. Did you know what you wanted to do? You wanted to be a lawyer, and obviously life kind of takes us in different directions. And I think a lot of people out there allow life to take them in different directions rather than taking the bull by the horns and saying, no, this is the direction I want to go in. But we also have to be able to pivot and recognize when, okay, maybe that wasn't really the right path for me. This is the right path for me. So tell me about your opportunity as COO at 24.
Yeah, so I used a word I often use, which is pivot. And I've given the advice also not only to my children, but to certainly anyone that I'll coach or mentor in a business capacity around following your passion. And I think that's what I did. So when I was in university, I worked at a bank. And I was a voracious learner. So even though I was in university, I took a lot of courses through the bank to gain greater skill. So I got my securities license. I was working in their contact center, which created a lot of flexibility for my school schedule as well. And I got promoted up to leading contact center operations for the discount brokerage, given the securities background. It was that experience. I spent 6 years working in financial services through college, and then they relocated me across the country. And I thought I was taking a year off before law school, and continued to work for them and got into like a more senior leadership capacity. And that's when I realized I really enjoyed the work, not only the complexity of the business that they, had me in, but leading people. And so I made a decision that I was going to stay and continue to, work in that, and kind of left the door open to go back at some point if I wanted to go to law school. I got recruited to be a chief operating officer for a business process outsourcing organization, even though it was a massive stretch role for me because I'd had only really operational experience. And in that COO role, although operations was a significant part of it, I led all functions of the business except for finance. So technology, marketing, sales, client management, HR, all as well. And those weren't all areas I was familiar with. And so I needed to surround myself with great people. And I think I got that role, one, because I had all the contact center experience, and that most of the outsourcing was contact center, and they had large financial services clients. And I had come from financial services. And also this degree of confidence that came across. I'm not a believer in like fake it till you make it, except when it comes to confidence. Confidence is often rightfully or wrongfully so perceived as competence. And so I just think I showed up that way, even though I was shaking on the inside, and landed that job. And I was also a brand new mother. My first was only a few months old at that point as well. So it was also risk-taking because I was leaving security of a banking environment that I'd worked in for a number of years as a new mom with benefits and everything I knew, to go into something totally new, and a risk role for me. And the taking risk more so, it's more about challenge. I like challenge, and I'm not a status quo kind of girl. And so I just took it because I believed it could create great opportunities for myself, for my family, even though it meant leaning heavily upon, my partner at home to, help with our new son and those sorts of things. And then from there, I just realized the dynamics of working in this large, complex business to business environment I thrived on. And so ever since, I've kind of stayed at the C-suite in tangentially, not all pure BPO businesses, but like professional services supporting clients and either their customers or their employees.
So do you still have a full-time job? I mean, or do you just do the speaking and all of that stuff now for like your
speaking is my side hustle. I think if it was one, and people have asked me many times, like, why don't you just go and do that full time? And I think because it brings me great joy, I think if it became my full-time job, I would enjoy it less. And so I like that I can keep this on the side. And in fact, I negotiate it with my last company. So I was most recently working for Accenture. I just left Accenture. And when I joined them, I negotiated it as part of my employee agreement. Executives are not supposed to earn income outside of your full-time employment with Accenture. And I said, look, I've been doing this for decades, the last 10 of which has been professional. I love it. You can leverage it. You can have me speak at conferences. Obviously, I'm not going to get paid for those, but leverage it. And then I'm also going to do this on the side. So I describe myself as a multi-potentialite. I have a ton of diverse interests that I like to do. So the corporate job pays the majority of the bills. And I should say my income. All of my bills are paid for, but the majority of the income comes from that day job and the complexity that comes with that. I thrive on, and then the public speaking and a little bit of like coaching, personal brand coaching, executive coaching I do on the side is the stuff I do for fun. Plus, that I sit on boards and do some mentorship, and of course have a whole family and life outside of all of that as well.
I don't know how you have time for all of that. No excuses. That's how you have time, and probably not a lot of sleep. So your personal brand coaching is something I read about when I was, looking at your website, and I was like, wow, I could use some help with that. Cause that's why I was so excited to have you on. And full disclosure, I totally made a mistake. And when I originally had asked if we could reschedule for last week, I realized later that I had a conflict. I had a doctor's appointment at the same exact time. And I was like, no. And he could not understand why I was so upset. I'm like, you don't understand. And then when you said you couldn't make it, I was like, oh, thank God. Okay, perfect.
Right.
I didn't have to tell her that I made a mistake. But yeah, no, I just was so impressed with your bio. And I was super excited to have you on because, I started everything kind of later in life. And I'm just always, I love to hear how other people have, climbed the ladder. And I feel like you and I are very, very similar in that we have this kind of side hobby thing, that's kind of driving us to want to inspire other people. And yet we still maintain this kind of, corporate day-to-day job at the same time. So I'm lucky enough that I'm also able to kind of work this in with my day job as well. My boss is actually super excited about it. So
Great.
That works out well. Honesty is great, when you're just upfront and honest with them and just say, hey, this is what I'm doing and this is my passion, and they can get on board. That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm very big on like being incredibly transparent, authentic with everyone that I engage with. Never need to remember, like for those who choose to tell lies or get in the gray zone, never need to worry about that, because you might hear the same story a second or third time from me, but you're always getting the raw truth.
The raw truth, exactly. It stresses me out to think about trying to make up an excuse or lie about this or lie about that, because it's never, ever, ever worked out, ever. I cannot think of a certain instance where I've been untruthful or not fully transparent and it's worked out for me. So I'm like, I would rather just, this is what I've got going on. This is how it is, and take it or leave it. Right.
Yeah. 100%.
So, yeah. So I had a question in all of that, but now I don't remember what it was.
We started talking about personal brand. Was it something to do with
that? We did. We started talking about the personal brand. Just that I think that's an area I need work in personally, with my personal development, but it was a question about you. And so you said that you had this confidence, you had this kind of stretch opportunity relatively young. What did that feel like going into that? And like what gave you the, I don't know. I would have personally been very fearful, but probably would have jumped at the opportunity as well.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that, again, now I have the language around it, but I was practicing it. And in that, I think that growth doesn't come if you aren't challenging yourself and leaning into that which makes you uncomfortable. And so that stretch role for me, it ended up being phenomenal for me. I truly think it set me up for the rest of my career. I realized I loved the dynamics of B2B, but also people outsource like functions, whether it's customer service or HR or finance, accounting. They outsource parts of their business, and they do it expecting it's going to cost less money, and usually better service. And it's like people go, it's your mess for less. But what that means is if you're in that business, the margins are lower. So like if you are not on your A game and learning how to lead a business, manage performance and teams, you lose money. So so I learned very quickly about how to run a business profitably. And so what I learned there, like truly set me up for life. And so that it just sort of reinforced that I took this huge risk and learned so much and gained significantly to be able to do more in the rest of my career. I didn't have, as I said, all the confidence at all. I was just very good, like putting on a mask. Now, I will tell you, I had some missteps from a leadership perspective, given that same mask I wore. So Tammy, I was 24 years old, the youngest probably by 2 decades of the senior team. I was the only woman. And I'm also part of the LGBT community. I was married.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that too.
To a woman before I'm now married to my husband. And so for me, I was like, oh my God, I need to show up in a certain way, less to do with the fact that I was queer, but more to do with that I'm a woman and I'm really young. So I'm like, I'm going to show up trying to be as mature as possible. I'm not going to show emotion. And it bit me in the ass because a few years later, I got a nickname I realized my nickname, someone told me was the Iron Maiden. And now, being really good at managing performance. I've also been through 18 mergers and acquisitions. And so those are like reorganization and restructuring. And so I can make the difficult decisions, but I didn't show feelings and emotions that are really authentically who I am. My best friends called me Turtle. I do have a very tough exterior. I'm extremely resilient, but I'm all marshmallow inside. And I let no one see that because I was afraid of what they might think. They might think I was soft or, maybe I didn't belong there. So I had to change the way. And so that was another one of those things that wasn't comfortable for me to like break that barrier down. Like we're going to show a little bit more, let people know I actually have emotions under there as well. But again, some of that was insecurity. So again, I showed up in a very particular way and people thought, oh my God, who's this like confident woman? And little did they know that like I was shaking in my boots many times and like needing to take the big breath before I like walked into that room. Now, 20 years later, I do have the confidence, I have the experience, and I'm really comfortable owning the room when I go in there and no fear. But again, I had to like flex the muscle to build some of that thick skin and confidence over the years.
Right. Well, and as a woman too, sometimes we get labeled as too emotional. So I can see where, we want to counteract that stereotype that women have, especially in a position that you were in, but then you're almost expected to have emotion at the same time because you are a woman. It's such a catch-22.
Yeah, it is. But I think, what I learned is, I've developed, I'll say a following of employees. There's many employees who have followed me to other organizations. Now that's why many companies write in non-solicit and you're not allowed to like hire employees for a period of time to protect themselves. But to the extent that I've been allowed or able to, I've built that and I'm still really well connected with many, many of my like former employees. And that has come by being vulnerable, being really authentic, being really transparent in my communications, and therefore, like they trust me. So we built this really great rapport and real relationship, and it's made a world of difference. And I do that. It's not just my employees. I'm known for that with my clients as well.
That's fantastic. So when did you realize you were part of the LGBTQ community?
I came out at 14 when I was in high school as being bisexual. My best friend and I disclosed it to one another. We were not we never dated or were together, but we both said, oh no, we're both bisexual. Yet I grew up in like Western Canada, and I was going to a Catholic high school. My mom thought they had a better gifted program. And so like, it was not something we were going to talk about openly in the school, although my mom was like super liberal and open. And so there was never an issue with her, but there wasn't a huge queer community that I was aware of as a teenager growing up in Calgary, which is like Texas North. And And so it wasn't until, however, I got relocated with the bank out of college to Toronto, which is a smaller, cleaner version of New York. And, just like this hugely diverse city where I gained exposure to and started, being much more. And in fact, my first work friend was a gay male, and he brought me into the gay village. And then, and so I quickly then started, I dated both men and women initially when I first moved. And then I met the woman that became my wife when I was 22 and she was 35. And like most typical lesbian relationships, that the joke is, what do you do on the second date as lesbians? Get the U-Haul and move all the cats, right? Like with one another. So yeah, we moved pretty quickly. I had said, hey, I always knew I wanted to have children. So we're like, boom, 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 boom. We went, and like probably like 6 or 8 months later, I was pregnant with our first child. And so, I'll tell you, like, I sort of vacillated over the years, like between, okay, I'm bisexual, I said at 14, to when I first got heavily involved in the gay community and started dating women. I'm like, well, maybe I'm a lesbian. And then I realized there's a hierarchy in the community, and actually bisexuals tend to be at the bottom. And so they're thought of and treated a little bit differently. And so I didn't want, even in the queer community, I didn't want to say anything. And then it was sort of in my like late 20s and 30s where I'm like, you know what? This is just me. I like people. It's not about the body parts. So my younger one says I should say pansexual. I've chosen the word queer because it just means, for me, I'm not straight.
Right. Yeah. I was going to ask you about the pansexual because, I don't fully understand the difference between bisexual and pansexual. I'm sure there is. My daughter is not part of the community, but she has a lot of friends that are, and, her generation, she's almost 30 now, and her generation grew up where it was much more open to be queer in high school and be open and honest about it, versus me growing up, you got teased, you were outcast, where in her school it was, you were very popular. Actually, I think it was like the total opposite. So she had a lot of those friends, and we've had a lot of conversations about it. So do you think you would have the drive that you have today had you not experienced the things you did initially in life, those first, pivotal 4 years of your life?
Yeah, well, 4 plus then, there was a lot of adversity.
Right. Yeah.
Beyond, and trauma, rape at 14. I think all of these things that happened are what, created this extreme level of resilience and my unstoppable nature of just pushing through all of those things to sort of anchor and focus on whatever goal or objective I had. I think there's a bit DNA, though, I will tell you. Like, I think innately, fight or flight, I'm a fighter. And so I think that's just innate in who I am and somehow in my DNA. So I do think there's that. And then there's all of this experience that's shaped my no excuses as sort of approach and attitude. Like, I will, and my kids hate the no excuses bit, but it's just like, look, when some trauma, adversity, challenge comes our way, let's feel. It's not about not feeling the emotion. We're going to have it. We're going to sit with it, but then we choose how we're going to move forward. And so I consistently made choices to move forward when a traumatic event or just a challenge or some kind of obstacles put in my way. And if I hadn't had them earlier, and my ability to be adept and, jump around these obstacles, I think I probably would still be here today. But it might have taken me a little bit longer to do some of those things. I might have been more fearful to take some of those risks and things like that.
The giftedness, do you know anything about your birth parents and, what they were like before drugs unfortunately took over their lives? And do you know where that comes from?
I know a little bit about my biological mother's side of the family. And so Julie, my biological mother, is one of 4 girls. And I think, her drug usage came from my biological grandmother I've met a number of times and have communicated to, and she's somewhat apologized for. Apparently that family knew I was being abused. And then subsequently when I was given up for adoption, and they all let me go and did nothing about it. So I don't have extremely warm feelings for the Saxon side of the family, her last name. but my grandmother acknowledged some of Julie's issues. She took accountability for. My grandfather was a military man, and my grandmother was home with 4 girls on her own and didn't handle it well. So, but then I look at the other 3 sisters. As I said, she's one of 4 girls, and one of them is a psychologist and has worked for, I think, the Betty Ford Clinic. The other one's a professor. Like, clearly, there's some brains in that family. And so I suspect it comes from there. My biological father, I know very, very little about. He actually wasn't ever part of my life. They were not together. I remember Julie with a different man, a boyfriend, when I was living with her. Right. I don't know anything. I think he was a taxi driver. So it doesn't mean taxi drivers are not intelligent. It's just vocationally, it didn't come from there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very interesting. Where do you think your ultimate strength comes from?
My strength, I'll just say from within. Although, and as we just talked about, I think all of this the experience I've had has kind of informed the way I look at the world and the way I approach it. And the turtle exterior, my best friend says I think comes from that, but I also leveraged sort of the exterior to motivate me to move forward. So even I think in business, a lot of people will ask me, like, have I ever personally had a really great mentor? I've had some good leaders that I've learned certain things from, but I've actually learned more from the ones who were horrible, and taken that as like, I'm going to learn to do better or different than that. Or I'll see something else, and that, someone who's achieved some other level, whether it's within an organization or personally, or even I'm a fitness fanatic and extremely athletic. And so even just seeing someone achieve their personal best, like that kind of exterior factor, it fuels the intrinsic strength and like competitiveness and like desire to do more. So I think I leverage both fairly well.
Fantastic. So what advice would you have for somebody who maybe has gotten to a point in life where they are ready to take the next step and ready to kind of take that bull by the horns? What would your advice be to that person? Somebody maybe who opportunities aren't necessarily knocking on their door.
We are all the CEO of us, of whether it's brand. I often say it when I'm talking about branding, but like a brand you, but like, and so, and I combine that with my thoughts around like boundaries. And by that, I just don't mean that like the confines and the rules that to allow yourself to do all. It's also around like, don't let anyone tell you how far or wide you might possibly go, and trying to confine you into that. And so I would tell your listeners that like, you're in charge of that. You're the CEO of your career, of your personal life, of your brand, of all of those things. And so you curate what that means for you, but at the same time, not by someone else's like definition or standards. So for my children, I remember my son at one point, I won some award and he's like, Mom, I'm like really proud of that. And he's like, I just want you to know, like, I don't want to be you. And it's more, I think there's a lot of pressure that they feel. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, look, buddy, I'm like, you're going to define what success is for you, right? Like do you feel like you, and so this is what I tell your listener, like you do what brings you joy. What are you passionate about? And if you're in whether it's a job or a relationship and it's not working for you, then you need to take that bold step. And yes, you need to plan. And I think of like, I divorced my ex-wife, mm-hmm. Of course, and she passed away a couple of years afterwards, but like, and that was hard, but it wasn't fulfilling for me anymore. And mm-hmm. So, but you make plans and you do what you need to, or whether it's like in a career, like, but you have to, as I said, if you don't challenge yourself and take some risk, I think the growth and the opportunity is not going to come, so we are in charge of that.
We are in charge. I think I would add a couple of things to that. Don't let the fear get in the way.
Exactly.
Understand that it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy, and that you're probably going to fail a few times before you succeed. And you may succeed and then fail again. And that's okay.
Yeah. Give yourself permission to fail.
Yeah. Learn from the failures.
Exactly.
Learn from failures that happened in your life long ago that maybe you didn't learn from then. You can learn from them now. It's never too late. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Do you have any last words or anything else you want to talk about before we close?
Oh, I could talk forever. So
I bet you could.
yeah. No, it's been a great dialogue. I really appreciate it. Thank you so
I
much.
really appreciate you. Yeah. I think doing this podcast has been so great because, and it's not even something I considered when I started doing it. I get inspiration, so much personal inspiration from the people. My point in doing this was to get the word out for other people that might be struggling. And it's been so personally rewarding for me. I just love it. And then it's not just the initial interview. Really, I think the majority of the inspiration comes from the editing because I get to watch it over and over and over again, and the message gets to sink in. And there's sometimes I'm so nervous when I'm doing the interviews that I maybe don't even hear something, or it just goes right over my head. And there's so many times I'm like, oh, I should have asked this question, or I should have asked that question. But it's very rewarding for me, 3 times over. So I really appreciate you. And I was, like I said, very excited to have you on, and congratulations and all of your success. And I hope to follow in your footsteps.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. You're so welcome. So have a great afternoon.
Thank you. For customers, how they choose to do that is really up to them.
Deliverables, not schedules. I want you to be my boss, Victoria. Victoria Pelletier.
So when we talk about inclusion, it means bringing your whole self to the workplace.
This week, Victoria Pelletier turns her childhood of abuse into an unstoppable career.
Today we have a very special guest by the name of Victoria Pelletier.
For me, I come from a very, very difficult early beginning, being born to a drug-addicted teenage mother who beat me severely. I went in and out of care a number of times, and I was one of the fortunate ones who was adopted and removed into a safe and loving home by parents who cared and loved for me deeply. But that experience is what has driven me forward. It is why I live this unstoppable life.
Partnering in the early years, it isn't about just the visible board and executive levels. It's about building a pipeline for the future. So things like P-Tech schools, where we start looking in the elementary level and in the junior high and high school level.
It really is about bringing it down to values, inclusiveness, and representing all our constituents across both sides of the aisle.
It's not easy, but if it doesn't challenge you, the growth won't come. So thank you for having me here tonight.
This has been a Without Regret production. For show notes and resources, visit withoutregretpodcast.com. Senior producer is Tamara Albrecht. Our theme song is by Michael Berguglio. Artwork is by Tamara Albrecht. Executive produced by Tamara Albrecht. You can follow us on Facebook at withoutregretpodcast.com and on Instagram at without_regret_podcast. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.